Um, Let's start with some questions first today. Why the price difference between the different technologies? Well, I mean, the basic reason is the different materials costs are different. Polyurethane foam, the traditional foam, and polyester resin have been around for a while, and they are typically the least expensive. Epoxy resin costs more. You use a little bit less when you glass the board, but it costs more. And then the EPS foam costs about the same as the polyurethane, maybe a little bit more, the EPS foam.
Yeah, it dropped a lot. Used to be higher. Now it's almost the same, sometimes even cheaper.
Yeah. And then the cloth that gets used. Traditionally, we've always used like an E cloth, and S cloth came along that was more expensive. Carbon more expensive. Carbon Kevlar more expensive, and nowadays we also have waterproof foam like XCR uses it, Patagonia uses it. That's our torsion spring, is an extruded styrofoam. And it takes more labor to glass epoxy and the exotic cloths. So that's the basic reason. Which board construction is the most durable? Epoxy is proven to be a much stronger resin, and it maintains its flex longer. It's a little bit livelier. It depends on what kind of core. You can glass any type of core with epoxy. Polyester, you have to pretty much stick with polyurethane foam. And so, I mean, in terms of our range, the torsion string is pretty durable. In terms of being affordable durability, I'm a huge fan of the E-poly. That's the polyurethane core with the epoxy resin. Once again, the board will feel livelier than a PU core. Well, livelier than the polyester glassing. It will stay stronger longer, have better flex. And there's exotic boards, but in terms of commercially what's out there, I'd say the extruded foam with epoxy resin, followed by E-poly. The extruded foam tends to run a lot more than polyurethane. Which board construction do you prefer shaping? Well, the polyurethane is, I don't know, it's been around a long time. We've all developed techniques to shape it. And, I used to consider it the easiest. But as new polyurethanes have come on the market, it's the problems we used to have with Clark foam, like the soft spots and the gas bulbs and things like that, those have pretty much been eliminated with the newer polyurethane foams. The EPS foam, when it first came out, was kind of a nightmare to shape. At first, if you're beginning, if you're early in your shaping career, and the beads used to tear out, and you had to kind of finish the board with different materials. I had a planer with a grit on the barrel instead of blades, and that really helped. And in fact, I ended up using it on polyurethane too. Yeah, it's like a 60-40 grit. It's on the barrel. Instead of blades, it's wrapped around the barrel. It's nice. It's quieter when you shape, and it cuts a lot cleaner. But the EPS foam's evolved. It's gotten you have to steam the beads to get them to expand and connect, and the foam makers, because it's become a pretty big part of the surfboard industry, the foam quality has been improving all along, and there's some pretty good foams out there now, especially the high pressure EPS foam. Let's see. Elad, what do you think about ASIM boards? Did you ever shape one? My first board in late 1966 was a Carl Ekstrom asymmetrical. And in the late 70s, my good friend Henry Hester wanted me to make him asymmetricals, and a few other people got asymmetricals. And it's an interesting story because I'm watching the younger shapers having a field day with asymmetricals. I believe in asymmetricals, but I believe that the asymmetry can be a lot more subtle. A great photographer got a board for me once, and he loved it, and he wanted it repeated. And it was a computer program shape, so it was easy to repeat the shape. Glassed it and gave it to him, and he said, "Yeah, it works pretty good, but not that good." And I took a look at it, and I said, "Oh, okay, I'll try a few little changes here." And we tried again. He goes, "It's still good, but it's not great like that first board." So I looked at the first board, and sure enough, the fins were offset. The one fin was a quarter back, and the other side was a quarter up, and that was his magic board. I used to make myself asymmetrical boards for spots like restaurants that you're going to be surfing lefts the whole time. And some of my Indo trips I used to take asymmetricals. That was 15-20 years ago. And currently, the last time I really shaped a lot of asymmetricals, I did a quiver for Josh Kirk for Tahiti, and the boards had one rail longer than the other, and one rail softer and fuller than the other. And he wrote him, he liked him, he did well in the contest. Like I said, the younger shapers are making, I would call them radical asymmetricals. I don't. They're different to ride, but I don't know if they're better. But yeah, I'd say subtle asymmetry is a good thing. Most of our production used to be for stock boards for stores, and so you had to guess. Okay, well, you see, 80% of the surfers out there are regular foot, and 20% are goofy foot, or whatever the ratio is. And the store owners quickly realized that stocking asymmetricals was a big gamble. But with custom boards, I still get a few orders, and they're usually pretty subtle. One side's like a swallowtail, and it turns into a round tail or a thumbtail on the other side. But yeah, if you're curious, approach your shaper, and I would say go subtle, like not much difference between your front side and your back side. And even if you get a symmetrical board, maybe try one rail softer than the other and the fins offset. Matthew Henson. What does a different fin angle do to the feel of the board? That's a good question. The fins, people really underestimate fins. They're like the wheels on your car. If they're bald, they're gonna be sliding. Bald will be sliding all over the place. You won't have control. If they're too full, the car will be freaking bouncy and hard to control too. And if you get a good set of tires with good air pressure and good alignment, all of a sudden your car or your board comes to. It drives straight. It drives solid. And the same is true with surfboards. And usually the lighter the surfer, the smaller the fins they need. The bigger the surfer, the bigger the fins they need. When FCS first came out, before that we had all fiberglass fins, some G10, which is like a high density carbon, high density epoxy fin that would have as many as 34, 36, 38 layers, but it would be a 1/4 inch. And if you use 6-ounce cloth, fin would be maybe 8 layers. And if you use 4-ounce cloth, which is what I liked before the composites came out, you could get 18 to 24 layers in a fin. And the more layers you get, the more I think you can control the flex, and the more you can control the foil. And back to fin angles, boy, they're crucial. And I worked with Ray Lynch for a while, a few years ago, and he insisted that the fins, no matter what kind of bottom you had, heavy V or heavy concave, the fins, the base, and the tips, they had a relationship, and the tips were 7/8 of an inch total farther out than the bases. So whatever degree angle that is, I don't know, 4 or 5 degrees, 3, 4, 5 degrees, Wayne insisted that was the best. But the tip, to try to explain it simply, the straighter forward the fins are, the straighter forward the board's going to go. It's going to have more flat out speed, but it'll be it won't want to break its line. And as you start to bring the fins in and point them towards the nose, the arcs will become shorter and shorter. I used to do 2 inches off the nose, a straight line from the rear of the fin to the nose. 2 inches off the nose is a good all around. Lately, with the more rocker that everybody's been using, I'm having good luck with 3 inches off the nose. And is in terms of the cant, the tilt out, the straighter up and down they are, the stiffer the board will be from rail to rail. It won't want to roll over in a rail as easily as fins that are splayed out. And if you get them right, the board rolls from rail to rail and the board charges ahead. If you get them too splayed out, the board does it climbs out of the water quickly. It does a very short arc turn. It climbs out of the water quickly. So yeah, fins, and there's a lot of great composites on the market now. I used to tell my friends, they go, what kind of fins should I get? I'd say, well, friends don't let friends ride plastic fins for starts. So you get a nice, you find the right fit. A lot of stores demo fins, FCS, Futures. And if you find the set that you like, you buy them and you keep them. Most people are giving plastic fins away with their boards. Plastic fins, they cost us almost next to nothing, and they cost the people that make them next to nothing. And you keep you don't use the fins. You put them away, and you get composite fins. You make an investment that you can use those fins from board to board to board. They're so durable. They're so good. So when it comes time to sell your board, you pull your composites out, and you put your plastic fins in and sell the board. Um, uh, how important is tail rocker and how to combine it with concaves? Well, last week I touched on volume slightly, and I really need to spend a lot more time on it. But all the elements of the surfboard are important. The balance of the outline, the balance of the foil, the amount of rocker, entry rocker, exit rocker, where the deepest point of concave is, your fins, the placement, what size fins you're using, and the surface area of the board. You can have two boards that were identical in every way, except one was an inch narrower or a half inch narrower, and they would ride a lot different. So the tail rocker, I think the tail rocker more and more as shaping machines have been around, I think, hand shaping is great, especially if you got 10 or 20,000 boards under your belt. I used to say it takes 10,000 boards to become a great shaper, a good shaper. Maybe 1,000 these days with a machine. I don't know, 50 or 100, but the machine helps. You can experiment with rocker, and you can hold everything else consistent, or you can make adjustments to other parts of the board. But on an average 6-foot board, if you want a groveler, a board for mushy waves or flat waves, you go maybe 1.9 inches, and it's just not a tail rocker. I used to measure 6-inch increments, and if you just put it all in the tail, the board's going to it won't hold a consistent line. If you have it start too far up, it'll be stiffer. But if you have the fulcrum of the rocker between your feet and the deepest point of the concave, between your feet are a little bit farther forward towards your front foot. That works on most of the boards I make. And a shallow concave would be a point like 1/10 of an inch deep, maybe. A medium concave would be in the high teens, and a deep concave would be anything over 0.2, 0.25 I consider fairly deep. I do some boards with 0.3 inches of a third of an inch deep concave. But most of the high-performance short boards, the concave helps generate lift. It helps create bite on the turns. The concaves run between 0.12 and 0.2. As you get into boards for bigger waves, the bottoms start to flatten out, and you get boards still might have a light concave in the center, but as you come back into the brains part of the board, into the energy center, you're starting to get the spine above the rails, so you're starting to get a plus value on the bottom, and you get into really big boards. And I'll do a 0.01 towards the center of the board, and it'll be close to almost maybe a 0.17, a point, maybe even 2 on some of the really big boards I do. And that's because you have a much longer board, you have much more power, much more speed, and I don't think there's any. There might be a few shapers out there that use concaves and big wave boards, but they're too uncontrollable, and the V helps you connect one rail and connect it to the other rail in your turns, and it helps you put the board on rail a little bit easier. Okay, next question. What type of board do you like? I like to shape all kinds of boards. We've been experimenting with soft tops for a couple of years. We have a small demo fleet of great soft tops, and I'm not sure if and when we're going to make them part of the line. But a few years ago, people mocked or laughed at the soft tops, thought they're for kooks. But there's a lot of great surfers that can. What's the name of the soft top company, Pedro, that everybody, all of the pros have signature models? It's, Jamie rides them.
Yeah.
Dane has them all. They all have. I don't know if Dane does, but Jamie's probably the superstar that rides them. And the performance level's pretty good on them these days, and durability is pretty good. I have friends that go to Costco and they buy the 8-foot boards for $99.95. They take them out and intentionally they run into each other with them. They run into the rocks. They don't care. And I don't know if they still have this policy at Price Club, but if you break one, you return the broken one. They'll give you a new one. But that's entertainment surfing. I think when the waves get better, it's pretty across the board that people go back to their regular surfboards. I've noticed that you set the rear fins in your quads closer to the center of the board than some other shapers. What's the reason for that? What?
The company was Catch Surf.
Oh, the software company was called Catch Surf. You go on their website, they have about 20 top pros that each have a model that all looks suspiciously the same. But back to the rear fins of the quads. In the early days of quads, I first started making right at the beginning of the 80s. I think Glenn Winton was the first pro to come to me for a quad, and we experimented a lot. I had one board that he was here to surf a contest in Oceanside, and he had me change the fins 3 times in 3 days. And they were pretty minuscule changes, but each time he goes, "Oh, we're closer, and they're getting better." And so I learned a lot about quads then, and then around 2004, 2005. Nate Fletcher, I think, was riding stretch boards and he was riding quads, and then one of my North County team guys tried his board and freaked and came to me, and then I made one, and I rode quads are my favorite board. I think they're great for small waves, for hollow waves, for big waves, and there's a guy named Bruce McKee that I don't know if I'll call him a pioneer of quads, but he's been making them consistently for 30, 40 years. And, I looked a lot to his designs. And I just, after building quite a few for team riders and quite a few for myself, I just felt that they needed to be a little bit farther away from the rail than the front fins, and a little bit straighter up and down, and a little bit straighter ahead. And they have a much more neutral feel. You kind of don't feel them if they're placed right. And the same thing with a Twinser. I see people making those 4-foot boards, and where they put the front fins in connection to the back fins, most of them are missing the point, or they're missing out on a true design. And with a Twinser, it's a different sort of forefin. when you get the fins placed right, it almost feels like you don't have any fins. You have power, a lot of speed, solid turns, but it's like the drag is reduced. And you think it'd be the opposite because you have more fin area, but it's about water flow, and so that's a lot of it's been trial and error. I didn't read it in a hydrodynamics book. It's just like a lot of design. It evolves over time, and I still think a lot of shapers put their main fins, their front fins, too close to the rail. I typically put my short boards about 1.25 inch, sometimes 1 3/8 on the rail. And as the boards get longer and the tails get narrower, you kind of try to balance between how close the fins are together and how close they are to the rail. But I rarely go any closer to the rail than 7/8 of an inch. All right. Hello, Costa Rica. Phew. Ariel Brins. Excuse me, I'm just looking at different questions and comments. Difference between channels and no channels. The first channel bottoms were explored in the mid-70s, and a lot of the surfing done on them was, Bali was kind of new, and there's long, perfect waves, and usually pretty good surface conditions. And so 6 deep channels were developed during the mid and late 70s, I believe. Could be wrong, but and some shapers here in the States and other parts of the world started trying them out and adopting them to their quiver. But what the channels do is they do a lot of things. You have the curve at the bottom of the board, but the channels straighten out the curve, and it depends on where the deepest part of the channels are. And once again, I believe the deepest part of the channels should be that sweet spot that's between the center of the board and the front of your fins. I did some 8 and 10 deep channels on some boards, and the more channels you have, the more it breaks up the bottom laterally, and you can feel it. The board rolls on a rail and holds its line. Quite a bit of difference between a convex or a straight concave bottom, and I rode quite a few in the 80s. 80s and 90s on my trips to Indonesia and Fiji and whatnot, where the waves were long, hollow, and clean. And four channels. You can run 4 channels off the tail. They get progressively deeper, and those once again give you direction, but they give you a lot of bite. And it's harder to come up the face and do tight turns, but the board, it still has a decent turning radius, but it's really solid and it's squirty. That was my first impression of riding a channel bottom. Is it went down. It wasn't a straight line, but it held a line, an arc, depending on how much rock I had on board. It held it, and it was very solid. And the board would squirt. The water is instead of spilling off the rails, the water is being part of the water flow was being forced between the fins, and that's my explanation. And then there were 4 belly channels that people explored. during the 80s, the early 80s and on. And those generate a little bit of lift, and they help the board roll from rail to rail. They make that transition from rail to rail a little bit easier. And by having them zero out between the fins, so the belly channels are from the fins to just behind the midpoint, so they're shorter channels. And typically they're a little bit shallower than the deep channels that run off the tail. And the belly channels were used, I don't know, by quite a few surfers in a bit of what, the mid 80s. And I'm getting a lot of like on the blade. I'm getting a lot of orders. People prefer or they want to try the channel bottom before channel blade as opposed to the concave. Question about a forgiving board, yet still performance. I'm a big fan of the flat deck boards or flatter deck boards. I typically make them almost a quarter of an inch thinner than crown deck boards, so you have a lower center of gravity. The board flexes more because the closer the top and the bottom get together, the easier it is for the board to flex. If you can imagine a board that was half an inch thick, the thing would bend. It would really bend. If you have a board that's 4 inches thick, it's not going to bend. So, like I tell people, all their design questions, I go, well, take your thoughts and take them to an extreme. Like, well, what's a lot of rocker do? Well, it's a lot of arc, and that arc translates into a tight turn, but it won't take you down the line. Well, what's with a flat arc? I go, imagine a flat board. All it wants to do is track down the line, and if you try and break the line, it'll slide out or fight back. But I like flat deck boards, and in the late 60s, the early 70s, Brewer got a lot of the credit for his flatter deck guns, and a lot of shapers. Who knows who was first? Who knows who made the most or whatever? But there was a lot of experimentation with narrower boards, flatter deck boards, and the guns are actually pretty thick, but the hot dog boards are a little bit thinner. And they kind of dropped away in the late 70s. In the early 80s, I had some team riders that kept trying to go, I want the board thinner, I want the board thinner. I'd make them a thinner board. They go, I want it thinner. And I started freaking because, I was making 160 to 70 pound surfers boards that were, 2 1/4, 2 3/16 thick. And in my mind, I thought, whatever they're getting in performance on these thinner boards, I think whatever the pluses are, there's negatives, because unless you're in an optimal place in the wave, the board will catch rails and so forth. And so I started making the decks flatter again and the rails boxy, but my rails weren't boxy. They were flat deck in the bottom, and then they would come off the deck pretty abruptly, and the angle would go farther down the rail towards the apex. And in my mind, that bottom half of the rail, there was less volume than a crown deck board. The top half of the rail, there was more volume there, but the bottom half of the rail, there was less. And if you got the volume and you got the thickness right for the surfer, the boards would tip over and the rails would set, and they would come back out of the water as you unweighted a lot quicker than crown deck boards. And as the boards the rail line, as you got towards the tail, got even steeper and steeper. And if I remembered for anything, maybe my the last 18, 16 inches of the board, the rails became more and more square in the last 10 or 12 inches. 9 inches or halfway through a fin or partway through a fin, the rails got virtually square. And so I made Aki his first one in '83, and I think I've mentioned this before. I saw him surfing in Ocean Beach at a contest, and then he went to Africa. He made the board, and he went to Africa, and he left it behind here with Bob Hurley. He was riding for Billabong at the time, and he still is. But when he came back for the Huntington contest, Bob gave him the board, but he was kind of freaking out on the way it looked, and he wasn't sure, and so he didn't ride it, but he took it home and he tried it, and within a couple of weeks, he had the Pepsi Pro Junior, huge contest in Australia, and he won it on the board, and Bob Hurley called me, and he said, "Can you make more boards? I'll pay for them." And he's ripping on them. And he went to Japan and surfed in the Marui contest, which was the first one of the first real major events he surfed in. And he, in the quarterfinals, he broke about 6 inches off the nose of the same board he won the Pro Junior on. And he kept riding it. He just said, "It feels too good." And he got through the quarters and narrowly missed out making the finals. And, all the other pro surfers are looking at the board and they're going, maybe I should try one too. And so the next couple of years, I didn't sponsor all of them, but a lot of the top pros, at one point, I had almost half of the top pros, riding my boards at one point a year during the competitive year. But I think if a flat deck board is made properly, rail line's good, decent amount of rocker, and that's why we've expanded our flat deck series. A few years ago, we resurrected the '84, which is the first board that Aki got, and we did 100 limited, and some people hung them on the wall, other people rode them, and they freaked. And so the next year we released the Blade, which is essentially the '84, but without the beak. I modernized the rock. I gave it a little bit more rocker, and I thinned out the front a bit, modernized it a little bit, and a lot of people that have gotten them have liked them. And they come in 4 channels, so they come in the concave. And a lot of people order 4-channel blades. And then years ago, I did some fun boards that the Modfish, and a couple of other roundish short boards that had flat or concave decks. And I think they would have done better these days because people were more focused on the high performance shortboard a few years ago, and now people realize that they can have a lot more fun on a shorter, wider board. And but so we introduced the Hatchet and the Shiv, which is basically the SD, which is the board I made for Dane Reynolds for the stab contest a few years ago. I thought Dane surfed really well on the board. He was very vocal about the boards he didn't like, and he was pretty vocal about the handful of boards he liked. The only comment he had for me is he goes, "I don't know, man, the tail template's kind of trippy, but yeah, it rides pretty good." Anyways, it ended up becoming a very popular design, and I said, "Well, heck, why don't we put it in a flat deck?" And people are starting to discover it, and it's starting to become more and more popular. So there's the Hatchet and the Shiv, and then the 419 Fish, which is it's got some history in a traditional fish. The wider, I don't go 10 inches, I go about 8 or 9 inches, about 8 inches wide in the corner to corner. And a little bit fuller nose, lower rocker. But that board has a flat deck too, and people are really liking the Shiv and the 419, and they're starting to discover the hatchet too. So those three, plus the blade, plus the 84, and some of our older small whip boards all have flat decks. And I tend to think that the flat deck boards or the flatter deck boards, if they're made right, are very high performance, but yet very forgiving. There's some questions I'm not going to answer. And no, I'm not giving away boards. We've got a team. And if you want a free board, you better get in the line, but it's a long, long, long line. Why do you think the 4F was a power line? Danny Falco, yep, your board is getting ready to be shipped. Danny Battaglia, where's your question? Why do you think the 4F wasn't a popular model, or should I say not as popular? Every year we try to introduce 2, 3, 4, 5 new models, and a couple of performance short boards, a groveler, and then maybe a bigger fun board or something, or and the 4F is a good board. It just, some boards just don't click. Like when I first made my son designed the Model 8, and he designed it several years ago. And when we first introduced it, it kind of had a lukewarm reception. But over time, I look at all the orders that I'm doing now, and the Model 8 is right at the top of the list. It's one of the more popular models right now. So sometimes it just takes a while for a board to catch on. I have an interesting story. I'm not sure if I told you yet about Josh Kirk. We sponsored him for 20 years, and he got a lot of boards. And towards the end of his sponsorship with us, he came to me one day. He called me one day. He goes, "I just wrote a board. It's so sick. It's insane." I go, "Well, who made it?" And he goes, "Well, you did." And I go, "How long ago?" And he goes, "Well, a couple of years ago. I didn't like the looks of it at first. So it's just been sitting in my garage, but I took it out today and the thing went off." So, even if you're a top pro surfer, sometimes you really can't tell how a board's going to go until you take it in the water. And, maybe the 4F will develop a following in the next year or two. Joe's a good friend.
This is a good one.
What?
Width and thickness or volume.
Or volume?
Yeah. What's the relationship with thickness and width?
What's the relationship between width, thickness, and volume? Generally, as boards get shorter and shorter, for lighter people, I think they need to become narrower and narrower, and thinner and thinner. And they're just shrunk down proportionately from, say, a Pro 6.2. If a Grom wants a 410, I have a kind of a formula that works. The Pro's board might be 18 5/8 by 2 1/4 or something like that, and the Grom's board will be 16 3/4, 16 1/2 by 1 3/4 to 1 7/8 inches thick. And the volume, it's important. for a younger surfer, developing surfer, if you look at the volume charts that I've done, younger surfers tend to ride really, really small boards, really light volume. And then as they start to get bigger, I believe their volume needs to go up just disproportionately, only a few percentage points. But and in the boards, around in the high fives in the six foot range, there's all my boards are. I think I like try to shape for the most part pretty balanced foils, pretty balanced outlines, and pretty even flowing rockers. And but the volume, I'm telling you, I this last week I had a couple guys that were pissing and moaning. They were going, well, I can't decide if I want a 2.4 thick or 2.39 thick, but I want it to be 33 liters. But I'm not sure if I want it to be 1/100th of an inch thicker. So I had to talk with Mickey, who designed the machine that we're using, and hundreds of others, and has been working with Thomas in France on the software. And he said, Rusty, when I first had the program, we used to measure volume in beers, not a tenth of a beer, not a half of a beer, a full beer. He kind of had a chuckle, and he goes, over time liters, but I insist that the World's Top Pro might be able to tell the difference if a board is a half a liter thicker than the next board, maybe. The average surfer, no, that's a half a beer or half a cup of soda or whatever. You can't feel it. And the guys that are freaking fussing over 1/10 of a liter, 2/10 of a liter, dude, that's a fucking very light piss. That's like, you guys are so hung up on volume because virtually every surfboard builder's site, especially if they use machines, well, the hand shapers don't, but anyone that uses a machine has a volume calculator on their website or a volume chart, and we're all kind of similar in the average size, the volume for an average size person. But as the person shrinks or as they grow, we start to differ. But Mickey said, he goes, the volume? That's the least important thing. He said, the bottom contour, the rocker, the outline proportions, and most importantly, the surface area of the surfboard has far more influence than the volume. If I made you a 6'6" Blackbird for blacks and you ordered it 19.5 inches wide, and I said, you might want to try 19.25. The volume is only going to drop a couple of tenths of a liter, but you'll feel the difference more significantly. The board will roll over on a rail a lot quicker. It'll be a lot more sensitive from rail to rail. It'll hold turns better. So I've been preaching this for a long time. The volume is something to refer to. It is not the gospel. And I have so many beginning, intermediate surfers. These guys coming off an 8-foot soft top, and I want to get a 6-foot SD to take my surfing to the next level. And I just go, please listen to me. Try not to take more than 6 inches at a time. Because you won't. If you go from 8 foot to 6 foot, you'll have a hell of a time catching waves, so you won't have any fun, and you won't progress. But if you take a more reasonable chunk of length off, like I say 6 inches at a time, you will transition to that board a lot easier. You'll still catch a lot of waves, and you'll learn maneuvers a lot quicker. And I have people argue and argue and argue with me, and they finally cave in, and then after they get the board, even if I humor them and I go from 8 foot to 7 foot, they go, "Gosh, thanks. I don't know what I was thinking. I couldn't ride a 6 foot board." So, yeah, that's about it. Maybe take one or two more questions. Does Rusty usually glass a Blackbird with more layers than other boards? That's a good question. I mean, most of the high performance short boards and even the high performance fun boards, we typically use all 4 ounce, and that's because you want to keep the board light. You want to keep the flex there. But as you make step ups and boards for bigger waves, you need more cloth and you need more wood to keep the boards from snapping. You can glass a 610 Blackbird all 4 ounce and with an 1/8 inch stringer, but probably wouldn't live that long. If you're lucky, it will, but probably not. As we get into boards in the 7 foot range, I'm going 6 and 4 on top and 6 on bottom usually with 3/8, like 3/16 to a quarter. And I like ply. I like plywood. I've used various types of ply, especially in my guns, for decades. And the reason is you have different pieces. You have wood with different grains, and the more layers that you put together, the stronger it's going to be. And we get into the guns, and I have. There might be a few other gun builders out there, but my theory is, as you get into a longer board, you want the balance shifted down towards the bottom, and you're not catching as many waves. You might catch 2 or 3 waves in a 2-hour session, 3-hour session, so you're not denting the deck up as much. So I'll put 3 layers of 6 ounce on the bottom of a 9 foot gun, and then I'll put 2 layers of 6 ounce on the deck. And I think too, there's an argument for having a little bit more cloth on the bottom is actually strength, just because of the way the board is built, the curve and the load. And then there's the different types of cloths. There's several different types. The E-weave is the most common production glass.
Yeah, we use S, E, and
S is a little bit more.
D. E, D, and S.
S cloth has got a little bit tighter weave and a little bit flatter weave. It tends to hold less resin, and it tends to be a little bit stronger than the E. But yeah, the cloth is important too, the build of the board. It's not the volume, guys. Have mercy on me, trust me. All right. Good day, everybody. You have a good night or a good day wherever you are in the world, and thanks for checking in. Take care.